Hello, my name is Jessica Duncan, and I work as an assistant professor in rural sociology at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. As the title suggests, this 15-minute talk is about how the global food sovereignty movement manages the contradictory goals of inclusion and diversity, and why categories like women and youth matter until they do not. To begin, it's important that I clarify that when I talk about the global food sovereignty movement, I'm using it as a shorthand to encompass the expansive networks of interactions between a plurality of individuals, groups, and organizations, all engaged in political or cultural struggles towards food sovereignty. Maybe the food sovereignty movement is most accurately conceptualized as a movement of movements that is widespread, diverse, creative, and politically amorphous. It's also important to mention that this talk is based on research and analysis that has been conducted with Priscilla Claes. Priscilla works as an associate professor at the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience at Coventry University in the UK. She's also involved in a lot of other neat projects, as you can see here. I highly encourage you to check out her video on governing land resources, which you can find through the CAR website, YouTube channel. So, through our engagement in global food sovereignty movements as scholar activists, we came to ask the question, in an expanding global food sovereignty movement, how can diverse groups of actors converge to advance collective objectives while ensuring that the diversity of their perspectives, needs, experiences, and identities are recognized? Essentially, we wanted to know, how does the movement balance diversity and inclusion whilst facilitating convergence? Now, to be clear, we're not talking about movement protests or local meetings. We're specifically interested in more formal gatherings where political decisions are being made and where representation is often contested. Basically, spaces where participation is limited. Now, we see the food sovereignty movement as a convergent space. A convergent space articulates a collective vision which serves to establish common ground and generate a politics of solidarity. These spaces actively shape political identities around common concerns like, for example, the right to food. But they're also sites of contested relations with groups holding conflicting goals and ideologies. This leads to the need for strategies that can simultaneously build solidarity and cohesion while negotiating and respecting difference. Over the last 3 decades in the global food sovereignty movement, actors have been experimenting with systems of categorization that attempt to do just that. Specifically, 2 tools have been used and adapted. First, constituency categories, and by this we mean groups of pastoralists, fishers, indigenous peoples, agricultural workers, and small-scale farmers, have been used to identify, protect, foster, and guarantee the autonomy of different groups of people with distinct identities and lived realities, but also distinct interests, roles, and responsibilities, as well as social positions. Second, quotas, and here we can think about gender, age, geography, and constituencies, have been used to protect diversity, prevent the consolidation of power, and ensure the prioritization of people most affected or marginalized groups. What we see is that the use of constituencies and quotas has also supported 2 other related objectives of the global food sovereignty movement, specifically alliance building and the effective direct representation of people in global policymaking spaces. So now let's have a brief look at how these mechanisms developed over time before reflecting on the implications for gender equality. Okay, the first time we see quota systems emerge is during the parallel NGO forum to the FAO World Food Summit in 1996. In preparation, organizers wanted to break away from the logic that those who have money can attend the meeting. So they divided the forum into 2 phases. The first was limited to 600 delegates with voting rights. Quotas were introduced to ensure that 50% of those with voting rights came from the Global South and represented local or national organizations of peasants, women, and indigenous peoples. The second phase was open to all interested organizations. In the lead-up to the follow-up in the World Food Summit 5 years later, what eventually became known as the IPC, or the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty, they came together to organize an NGO and CSO, which is civil society organization, forum for food sovereignty. Here, 600 participants were nominated by regional and constituency focal points according to a quota system designed to ensure balanced representation by regions, types of organization, and gender. In 2006, the IPC came to an agreement with the FAO to organize a parallel forum to the International Conference on Agrarian Reform and Rural Development in Porto Alegre, Brazil. To guarantee participation of different constituencies and regions, a political steering committee agreed upon quotas for regions, constituencies, and gender. As you can see here, there were distinct regions and constituencies. So we had 25% of participants should be from Asia. You can see that farmers made up the largest constituency with 60%, followed by indigenous peoples and fishers. The following year, in February 2007, the Nieleni Forum for Food Sovereignty was held in Mali. At this meeting, the constituency approach, or what was then called sectors, was sanctified, as one of our interviewees explained. Participants were identified on the basis of regional, sectoral, and gender balance. The organizing committee decided that there was to be an equal number of male and female delegates. Further, a women's assembly was organized for the day before the forum. And at this assembly, women decided that they would not act as a separate sector, which would mean participating in parallel meetings. Rather, they would integrate women's perspectives throughout the forum. All of these experiments and experiences fed into the design of the civil society mechanism for food security and nutrition that emerged in response to the reform of the UN's Committee on World Food Security. The civil society mechanism facilitates the participation of civil society actors in activities in the CFS. The mechanism was designed to give clear priority to organizations of people most affected by hunger and includes a commitment to respect pluralism, autonomy, self-organization, while ensuring a balance of gender, regions, and constituencies. So the CSM uses constituencies and quotas to populate their executive body, which they call the Coordination Committee, with 2 focal points, 1 male and 1 female, from 10 constituencies, as you can see here, and 4 focal points from smallholder farmers' constituencies. In the executive body, there's also 1 representative from each of the 17 subregions. 50% of the members of this body are meant to be women. This is proven quite easy for constituencies, where 1 man and 1 woman are usually selected. But this has been more difficult for regions, where only 1 person can be elected. The result has been an overrepresentation of male regional focal points. We can see that the use of quotas has been key to ensuring women's participation, and alongside quotas, women have been represented as constituencies in many instances. Yet, if we consider the case of the civil society mechanism, for example, the women's constituency was, until relatively recently, quite weak. Further, it has been represented by women who represent food-producing constituencies and not women's groups, although this is changing. That said, the Women's Policy Working Group of the Civil Society Mechanism has been strengthening and has recently produced a number of key outputs. In 2017, there was the CFS Forum on Women's Empowerment in the context of food security and nutrition, where people gathered to discuss challenges related to economic empowerment of women. In 2018, a women's vision document was released calling on the CFS to base its policy decisions on women's rights and to promote monitoring and accountability of policy decisions from a women's right perspective, and the women's rights approach is very key here. Finally, in September 2019, the CSM Working Group of Women released an input and vision paper aimed at influencing the CFS policy process on agroecology and other innovations. A shorter version of this vision is included in the 2019 Right to Food and Nutrition Watch, which has the theme of women's power in food struggles. So contrary to what many social movements suggest, protecting a diversity of identities, perspectives, and guaranteeing their autonomous expression within the food sovereignty movement has not fragmented it, but rather it has enabled the movement to come together, grow, and speak as a collective voice. Yet, as the global food sovereignty movement continues to converge, challenges will continue to emerge, notably when it comes to integrating new actors that may not necessarily fit the constituency logic. Also, despite quotas and constituencies, there remain challenges when it comes to gender equality specifically. How do we account for multiple identities? To which constituency does a young Indigenous female farmer align herself with? Does having gender quota mean that people feel gender has been adequately addressed, in turn blocking discussions and action around women's participation? We've also noticed some resistance when bringing up these issues with leaders in more formal spaces. I think it's also really important to recognize that, that being present is not participation or leadership, and that despite quotas, men are perceived to speak more. There's also very little space in these discussions to move beyond traditional gender categories, leaving non-binary identifying people excluded. Now, what we're seeing emerge at this moment is also a move beyond constituencies and quotas. So if we look to the recent IPC reform, we saw the establishment of collective leadership. In this case, regional focal points were removed as they were perceived to be gatekeepers and not adequately representing food producers. Thematic working groups became the main structuring mechanism of the IPC. Now, a key reason for this was to get a horizontal structure that reflects the fact that social movements are dynamic in ways that extend beyond clear categories of constituencies. This suggests a maturation of the political objectives, but also poses an important challenge to the consolidating logic of a constituency approach. So this has led me to think about two competing concepts when reflecting on how women are categorized and included in these formal spaces. These concepts are intersectionality and assemblage. First, intersectionality refers to aspects of social and political identities that overlap. It's at times referred to as matrices of domination. Yet, intersectional approaches can render identities static and can reduce external power hierarchies to binaries, for example, white or non-white. And this leads to what Spivak has called strategic essentialism. In having these categories, we often maintain essentialist identity standpoints. In contrast, an assemblage is defined as a whole constituted by material and expressive heterogeneous parts. Properties of the whole assemblage are not reducible to the component parts. The historically contingent nature of assemblages precludes essentialist identities. This means that categories such as race, gender, and sexuality are seen as events, actions, and encounters between bodies, and not simply entities and attributes of subjects. An assemblage approach can show how components of identities are not exclusively dissenting, but also converging with dominant and other formations in unplanned ways. With an academic shift emerging around assemblage thinking and reflecting back on our analysis of the importance of categories for maintaining a balance between diversity and inclusion, I'm wondering if doing away with identity categories presents an opportunity or a threat to gender equality in these spaces. Do we need categories to ensure women remain recognized and engaged, or should we aim for tools that decenter identity and revoke labels? So I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this talk. If you are interested in these themes and ideas, or if you have any comments or questions, please get in touch. I look forward to the discussion.